Jay, welcome to the show. I am so excited for us to chat today.
It's great to be here, and hopefully I can give you some insights that'll help a lot of these parents along the way.
You know, you and I, we've talked before just about how much knowledge parents need when they're going through this recruiting process with their kids, when they're trying to really learn what does it take to become a college athlete.
Yeah, and you know, I come at this from a couple different perspectives. Number one, spent 20 years coaching college football, so I was on the recruiter side with full ride sports. You know, and football. You know, and when I was at Madison University Connecticut, they were still FCS, where we could break up scholarships. So I had some understanding of the non-quote head count sports, as well as the full ride sports.
Oh, sure. As
a parent, I've had now 3 kids go through the recruiting process in lacrosse, where it's, hey, this is your package, this is that, this is how much you make, this is what it costs. So a lot of different perspectives. And even with all the experience that I had in college athletics, when it's your kids and when you're on the parent side, all that experience only matters so much, and it can be very confusing and very time consuming to say the least.
Yeah. And you brought up a really great point. And we talk about this often on the show, is that there are only 6 head count sports. And that means that those kids who are going to play Division I sports get a full ride or nothing at all. And, men's football, men's and women's basketball, women's gymnastics, women's volleyball, and women's tennis. All the other sports are what we were talking about as being equivalency sports, meaning like you're just going to get a percentage.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, the misperception that's out there. And with my kids playing lacrosse and going to all these lacrosse tournaments in the summer and talking to parents, I mean, there's a misperception that everybody gets a full ride. They see football and they see basketball. It's like, oh yeah, my kid, if my kid gets to go to this school, college is paid for. And that's not true. I mean, the overwhelming majority of them are half scholarships, quarter scholarships. And then you got to start doing the math as to what's the best place and what is within your range. I mean, sure, love to send your kid to Harvard to play lacrosse, but A, are they good enough? And B, if you get a quarter scholarship to Harvard or a school like Johns Hopkins or Northwestern or something like that, you're still talking $56,000, $58,000 a year, and I might be low on that number, but you're still talking a lot of money. So what you're really doing in those situations is, in probably 90% of college athletes, parents are essentially paying money for their kid to go play the sport they love in college, and they're getting a discount of some sort because of scholarship money, or they're walking on. So it's not the financial windfall everybody thinks it is.
That's right. And you mentioned something about, as far as like you being on the parent side of things, and then also being like the recruiter side of things. I mean, you spent about 9 years as the recruiting coordinator at Penn State. So you saw kind of all these ins and outs of meeting with students, doing evaluations. What were some of those top qualities that you were looking for when you were recruiting student athletes?
Well, I think the number one thing that student athletes should do to make themselves as quote marketable as they can are grades.
Yes.
Without question, it is. If we've got 2 players and you're looking at them and they're equal, in the same range talent wise, the one thing that there differentiates people right away, and it's in black and white on print. Well, probably not on paper anymore, but
it's electronic,
it's right there. You got one that's a 3.6 student and they did really well in the SATs, and one that is, C student that doesn't really work hard at it. Guess what? That's the quickest way to differentiate between 2. And I don't care what school you're talking about. Schools, if guys are equivalent in talent and one guy's much better, or I don't mean to be gender specific, if one player is, clearly they're in the same range, but one is clearly a better student than the other. That's where you're going to put your investment first, because that person is likely to make it through 4 years and graduate. Whereas the other one, you're going to be chasing all the time to make sure they go to class. And so that is without question number one.
Yeah. We talk a lot about that on the show because, my story, listeners know my background is I spent over 10 years as one of the academic coordinators or counselors in Division I athletics and worked from sports, from football to wrestling to gymnastics. And that was a conversation that we had all the time was, as you're recruiting this kid, where do they fall in the range and how successful are they going to be at the institution?
No question. I think obviously, athletic talent is a big part of it. There's no question about that. And, we didn't go out and sign a bunch of, Rhodes scholars who couldn't play football. I mean, there's a balance. But, for the guys, we took some guys that were borderline over the years without question. However, we spent a lot of time getting to know them.
That's right.
And sometimes it's a situation beyond a young person's control as to, we had a situation where we had a kid that was in a bad situation, but he busted his butt and he got decent grades and good enough to get into Penn State, but, turns around and graduates, with 2 degrees, and because they'd never been in a position where they had the support, never been in a position where they had any guidance. But again, you've got to, when you're trying to get schools to get a look at, your grades are going to be a big thing. But if not, obviously talent is going to be part of it. And, high school coaches, people in the community. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we had a high school coach say, look, you may think this, that, and that, this or the other about them, but I can tell you, without question, this person is an outstanding character, great athlete, the whole 9 yards. I mean, I can, Sean Lee, great football player for Dallas Cowboys, was one of the last guys we took in a recruiting class because his high school coach went to bat for him and said, I'm telling you, you got to take this kid. Allen Robinson's with the Chicago Bears, was from outside of Detroit. Michigan State missed on him because, he wasn't on all the lists. But, his tape got to us and his coach vouched for him. I mean, there's so many different paths to get there. But the important thing is that, you're out there and you have to be aggressive and you have to be proactive.
That's right.
Because nobody comes looking for everyone. And, so many people are hung up in the recruiting rankings and this star and that star, the whole 9 yards. And there's so many people that come out of nowhere. The last 10 years when I was at Penn State, we got 10 walk-ons who went on to the multi-year career in the NFL in a 10-year span because somebody got something to us or we noticed something or someone called and we said, oh, wow, this kid can play. And maybe we didn't have a scholarship for them at the time, but they walked on and within a year or two they were playing and we got them on scholarship. So those things happen, but you got to get yourself out there.
Yeah. And that's something we talk about too, is saying, with this starts your freshman year of high school. The grades start counting, the athletics start counting, all of this. And now, our students have a really big opportunity with social media, with Twitter. I know you're really big on Twitter. And, so I know a lot of coaches too, that's where they go, even Instagram, and they're looking and seeing. So how can students use that platform to stand out, to say like, here's who I am and here's what I'm doing?
Yeah, I think it cuts 2 ways. You have to be really thoughtful on social media. And I think that is not something that comes easily to not just this generation. Certainly when I was 16 and 17 years old, I was not thoughtful. Right. And thankfully there were no cell phones and thankfully there was no social media and Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff because God only knows what I would have posted. So they have to be very, very thoughtful and try and look at it from the perspective as what is a potential coach going to look at this and see. The news is littered with stories of people who, when they were 15, may have posted something that was anti-Semitic or potentially rape, whatever it is. And that doesn't go away. Someone finds those things. So I think you gotta be thoughtful, number one. Number two, I think it's a great tool to put out a highlight clip or just clips of, introducing yourself or just talking about, these are things I value. So I think there's a lot of different tools to get in front of people. And to go back to what you mentioned about the grades, I think one of the most, you talk about, it starts when you're a freshman. In the recruiting process, and this really throws everything on its head, your freshman grades are more important than your senior grades. because generally the recruiting process, by the time you get to your senior year, the only thing you've got in the bank are freshman, sophomore, and part of your junior year.
That's right.
When people are looking at you. So those, you could get all A's as a senior, but if you've got all C's and D's as a freshman, that's all, nobody's going to bank on what you might do. They're going to look at what's already on paper in front of them. So, as ninth graders, and again, it's hard at 14 to get that concept. But you can't stress it enough.
Yeah. And that's such a valuable point, because, the NCAA, when they get to that junior year, they have to have those 10 credits that are locked in for those core courses. And we talk about that too, about, what are those core courses? How do you find those? Because every school is different. Mm-hmm. And you need to make sure. And so that's why having these conversations, like you were saying, it's really hard at 14, but if you let people know, so like even just saying, hey, I want to do this. This is my dream, to your high school counselor, your coach, even a few of those teachers who are really influential in your life will help you stay on track and really move the needle forward.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. The only bad question, the only dumb question is the one that doesn't get asked.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And you hate to be at, 19 years old regretting something that you should have asked when you were 14. So, no one, it's one of those things where when you're 14, if you're lucky and you have, parents that are involved, that are proactive, then certainly they're going to push and ask certain things. But if you don't, ask guidance counselors, ask coaches, ask teachers, find the help you can get. There's so many resources online that they can get you the information that you need if they don't have it. But again, be proactive. Don't ever assume anybody. And it's hard, because when you are 14 years old and you are a standout athlete, chances are people have been coming to you for a couple of years, or you're 15, 16 as a sophomore, junior, and people have been doing things for you. Mm-hmm. Hey, I'll give you a ride to practice, or I'll make sure you this, I'll make sure you got that. And so for a lot of athletes that have been kind of recruited based on their ability from the time they were very young, it's hard for them to develop those skills where they themselves go out and do things for themselves. And you see that when guys leave college too, as well.
Right.
That, the world's always come to find them because of this talent that they have, as opposed to the other way around. And as soon as they learn that ability, the better off they're going to be.
So what are some tangible things that our students could do as they're thinking about, they're kind of taking a look back and going, oh yeah, people are really helping me out. So what are some of the things that they can do to be proactive in that, maybe asking some of those questions so that they build those skills, those transferable skills that you're talking about?
I think the biggest thing is, some of the most successful guys we recruited, it was usually mom, usually mom. When I say that, and that's not an exaggeration. That's based on, 20 years of recruiting evidence. Right. Moms tend to be far more organized in this stuff, and dads tend to be more on the fan side. Yeah. And certainly I say that, and I'm indicting myself because of my own kids' recruitment. That was the case. I'm like, okay, when do I have to drive you to the visit, or, what's going on?
Right.
But, having, sitting down with coaches early on, sitting down with guidance counselors, saying, what are the steps that we need to take? A, B, C, D, E, and F. Everybody wants to go to F,
that's
or
right,
G or H down the road, and not get A, B, C, and D in. To make sure that they get there. Because if you don't have the foundation, then you're not going to get where you want to get. So I think it's never too early to think about planning. It's never too early to sit down and say, let's talk about some of the things that maybe I want to get out of college. Mm-hmm. Do I want to be close to home? Do I want to be further away from home? So now that changes the parameters. Do I want to look at some of both? In this day and age now, with so much stuff being on the internet, mm-hmm. and being able to have Zoom calls with coaches and things like that, we're in a different world in terms of the information they can get, right, in terms of how they can research schools they're interested in. But, it's never too soon. I mean, nobody ever gets really in trouble because they've done some research too early as opposed to too late. So I think that would be the biggest thing. That the steps you want to take are having some idea of schools you're interested in, and then starting to contact them as you can, getting information, because you may want to be an electrical engineer and you find that the school you're interested in doesn't have it. That's right. So I mean, those are the things that I'm going through that with a son now who's in 10th grade, and he wants certain types of things, and we went down the list of schools, and this doesn't really have the major you want. This doesn't have this. I don't want to be in a city, or maybe I want, it's all these different things.
And you
start to eliminate.
Yeah. And you mentioned a really great thing about like virtual visits and interviews and stuff. There is a really great resource and a couple of great resources out there about for these kids. They can log into school, and most all of these schools have some sort of a virtual visit now. And they can go in and look at it and watch some videos and really see, okay, does this make my top 10 or my top 20? How does this fall?
Yeah, there's no question. And schools are being so creative and so proactive in how they market. And I'm not talking about athletics, but the schools in general, because we're at a demographic right now where for the next couple of years, the college age population in a number of areas is narrowing. So schools now know that, and it's going to broaden out again. And this is one of those things that we talk about in the board of trustees all the time. And so there's going to be a lot more competition for students. So schools are being much more creative in how they market things, and to not just athletes, but certain to all students involved. So, it's one of those things that as we go, there are going to be more and more resources for student athletes to look at.
Yeah. And just speaking of resources, we talked about this on the show too, but I do have, for parents listening, an NCAA eligibility roadmap. So we'll make sure to link that in the show notes. And it gives you a step-by-step of what do I need to start asking when, at what age from 9th grade on to the senior year, and some really tangible things to do, whether it's with your NCAA eligibility account or talking to your high school counselor. So we'll be sure to link that, because that'll be a great resource for parents to start using as well.
Yeah, no question. And again, it's one of those things that, parents don't know where to find stuff.
That's right.
So often. So the fact that you have that is really, really helpful.
Yeah. And we'll be sure to include, like you were talking a little bit about, like getting started your freshman year, all that stuff. I'll make sure to link the NCAA eligibility link in the show notes too, because parents, we talk a lot about when do we need to be registered for the Eligibility Center, and there's two different options. Is that free profile that you can get your freshman year, but then by your sophomore year you need to have that paid account so that you can start sending things in and not get behind, and make sure we're doing all the questionnaires and stuff.
Yeah, and the clearinghouse is, we were always impatient as coaches, like, hey, we can get this back, you get back, and you're like, you're not the only school out here, and this athlete isn't the only one we're dealing with. They're like, yeah, because before the clearinghouse, school, and I'm going back a few years, obviously showing my age, means schools would certify them by themselves.
Right.
And the reason the clearinghouse came into being is because schools were saying, oh yeah, cooking, that's a math class, because they use fractions.
Right.
It's like, no. And certain schools would take it, and that's why this all came into being, so that they to certify that. But the sooner you get into that system and have a feeling for where you're going, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah. And parents, you just kind of heard it from a former coach's perspective of like, yeah, a lot of times on the academic side and on the coaching side, we are waiting for things for parents to get them sent in, or high school counselors to get their students' information sent in. So whatever you can do to just be one step ahead of that game is really, really helpful, especially when you come into that junior, senior year of your kid, making sure their transcripts are with the Eligibility Center.
Yeah, and from another standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, the kids that are on top of that stuff, as opposed to, well, we're waiting, I haven't sent it in yet. You start to go, is this a pattern of behavior?
Right.
I mean, is this somebody who's a self-starter who's going to get after it, or is it now? By and large, again, it's usually moms that are like, hey, I called the guidance counselor, they sent the transcripts in the clearinghouse. Okay, good. But
and for students. Yeah. And for students listening, if that's the case for you, like remind your mom that needs to be done. Like make sure your parents are in on this conversation.
Or take the bull by the horns and go do it, and say, go to your guidance counselor. Because I did that with my kids. I'm like, well, you know what? You're there at school.
That's right. You know where the office is.
Yeah, you know where the office is. Go do it. They did. And so, it's a lesson for them, because I think, as parents, we constantly want to kind of, that's taken care of. There was a guy I coached with, Bill Kenny, for many years. He had a thing on his desk that said, prepare the child for the path, not the path for the child.
Oh, that's good.
And that is the great temptation that every parent has. don't wait, don't ride your bike there. You'll skin your knee, or I mean, we want to protect our kids so much, but at some point they've got to learn to run for themselves.
Yeah. Oh, that is powerful. And I'm like envisioning how that could work even at the college age, us being in the academic space of saying, okay, now we've got to prepare you for that next step. Because again, like, what do they say? Not all athletes go pro when they finish college.
Absolutely. No.
Right.
Right. And when they leave college, they've got to be ready, if they're not that pro person, to go out and, and the good thing about this recruiting process now, if they're proactive and progressive and go out and do a nice job of reaching out to people, that will pay off when it comes time to get a job after college, and that they'll already have that foundation of how do I make myself marketable, whatever word you want to use, to potential employers, and people that I want to work for, or I want to go to grad school, whatever it is. You got to have a handle on those things and be able to do those things for yourself. And I think that's, parents, again, it's hard not to want to do everything for them. But, you have to kind of let them grow, and that's part of the growth process.
And I will also say, from someone who's been in the academic space, when your kid is finally that junior in college and asking, we're going to give them the directions and then expect them to follow through, because we are also with you teaching them what that next step is.
Yeah. And that's valuable stuff. And again, the sooner they understand that, the better they are. Yeah. I mean, I coach a guy, Michael Robinson, who from, one of the main reasons we got him over some in-state schools and some other schools was, he knew what he wanted to do. He knew where Penn State's communications program was ranked, and that was a major factor in getting him. And he was very determined, very organized, and that's been his whole life. Even after college, you can see some of the things he's done. And there are so many guys like that we were fortunate to coach, who are just completely self-motivated and organized and detailed, knew what they wanted.
Yeah. And that helps so much in the recruiting process of when coaches see that, they see the determination, they see the discipline, and they know that student's going to bring that both in the classroom and on the field.
Yeah. And when you're trying to make yourself as valuable to a potential school as you can be, coaches that see that, they'll even if it's close, or maybe there's a guy who might be just a little bit better, or a step fast, whatever, they'll go to bat for that guy, because they know in the clutch that guy will make what happens, what needs to happen.
Yeah. And that is such wise words of wisdom for both parents and students as they're going through this whole entire process. And Jay, the podcast is called Confessions from the Sidelines. So we ask this question for every guest: is what is your favorite memory from standing on the sidelines?
Oh, geez. Well, most of my career, I was in the booth on the headset.
That's right.
So,
we'll say from the booth.
Well, technically, it's a sideline confession. But I mean, I loved when I was coordinating, and I loved calling plays, and I loved the back and forth, and I loved when a quarterback would come over the sideline. I'd say, "What do you see?" And they would talk about it, and we'd talk about what do you want to do next, and those kind of things, and the feedback. And the competitiveness of, when you had that guy that was really locked in. Yeah. I mentioned Michael Robinson, I mentioned Daryl Clark, other guys like that were really focused, and they would come off and say, I like this play or that play, or, they'd say, I don't want to run that one again. And they, that interplay was really, really good. And then the chess of the game. Yeah. Because the thing about sports is they're not robots. Yeah. Things happen. One of the things about analytics that everybody makes, you got the analytics told us to do this. Well, the analytics are good until kickoff. Right. Once the ball's kicked off, if there's an injury, we were playing Michigan State one year and their starting corner got hurt, and analytics wouldn't have told us that. And we right after him 2 plays later and scored. I mean, that's how you got to be. So I loved all that part of it, but I loved even more so than the sideline, not just on game day, but on the practice field. Yeah. I love the transition when you saw guys come in from high school with all the answers and then realized very quickly they had none of the answers. Yeah. And then within 2 or 3 years, they had them all the answers again, and the confidence that you would see, watching people grow like that to me was the real essence of coaching. I mean, the wins and losses are great. Game days feel great. But I mean, I was blessed. I spent 17 years coaching with my dad. So those memories are always going to be a big part of my life. You know, and I'll just give you one, just to give you an idea. You know, we played Northwestern in 2010, and my dad was going for his 400th win, and with about 50 seconds to go in the half, Northwestern scores to go up 21-0. And we hadn't scored, obviously. So we get the ball back. And I said to Bill Kenny, the sideline, I said, hey, ask Joe if he wants to, you know, run the draw. We make a first down and get in a 2-minute drill, maybe try and get some points before the half. And Bill goes down, hey, Jay, and those guys want to do this, this, and that. He goes, well, why not? Everything else they've done this half has worked. And I was like, wow. And he was laughing when he said it, but you know, it was like, oh my gosh. Well, as fate would have it, in 40-something seconds, we went 92 yards and scored, and then opened the second half and scored touchdowns in every possession and won the game. But had we not taken that risk and gone down the field and scored, we might not have won the game. But that line, I will never, you know, and the way, and he and I would walk home from games, and I said, I got to tell you, that one was a little bit, it was funny. It's funny now, but had we not won, that would have hurt. Yeah. Because I don't care if it hurts.
And I remember that.
It's just, you know, I hope every coach has that same feeling of, you know, why you're in coaching. You know, the money's gotten so big that unfortunately, I think it's attracting people to the sport that are in it for the money. And, you know, I came from an era of coaches where coaches were men, and I'm saying that is a very sexist term because you know, football, but coaches were adults whose goal was to help the young people become adults.
That's right.
And with social media and so many other things, you know, there's a generation of coaches, not all of them, but certainly there's a generation of coaches that are spending a lot of time trying to act like 21-year-olds rather than trying to get 20-year-olds to act like grown-ups.
That's right.
And I think, and that was the most rewarding part of the whole job, was watching people develop and grow and that kind of thing. And like I said, the wins and losses are secondary. And I think what you're doing, I think is great in getting parents to understand what college sports is about. It is a growth process. It's part of the educational experience. It is part of life, not life itself.
That's right.
And it can be a very, very rewarding and open a lot of doors for people that would not be open otherwise.
And I 100% agree with you. That is, when I was working in college athletics, one of my favorite things was hearing from my students after they graduated, telling me about what has happened next.
Yes. And it's fun because you feel like, you know, and they'll say, hey, I want to thank you for this. You know, I mean, I've had guys come back to me and said, you know, one time you said this to me. I'm like, I did?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like you never know when that one moment you're going to say something that sticks with them. And that's why it's so important, you know, to realize as coaches that you're dealing with young people.
That's right. And I think for parents too, as you guys are going through this recruiting process, it's, you know, we always talk about here about weighing your pros and your cons, but going with your gut. And you know, when your students in that moment, what the experience is going to be like for them when they make it to that next level, by having these conversations and hearing from the coaches saying it's more than just about the sport.
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, I mean, you know, we're in an era with the transfer portal now, and it's so easy to run from one place to the other rather than really stick, you know, put a stake in the ground and fight your way out of some adversity. I think that's one of the things the transfer portal has really kind of limited. But, you know, when you're picking a school, I think obviously coaches are important, but at the end of the day, for the vast majority of athletes, pick a school that has what you want academically.
That's right.
And imagine, you know, if I got hurt on week 2 and could never play the sport again, would I be happy going to school here? Because your coach could leave at any time. And, you know, find a place that's going to do the thing. Because as you said, the overwhelming majority of athletes go pro in something other than their sport.
Yeah. Well, Jay, thank you so much for just bringing so many words of wisdom and just your experience. I know that parents are just really going to take notes from this and glean all this information and make sure they put it into good use.
I appreciate it. Really, it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, so Jay, where can people find you if they want to like follow along? I know you got a lot of stuff happening on Twitter and on your blog. So is there places that they can connect with you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Jay Paterno, JayPaterno, on Instagram at JV Paterno, which is my middle initial, so JayV Paterno, and then jvpaterno.com is where I do I've written a couple books on college sports. I've done, working on NIL stuff, write columns. So, I mean, I'm doing every day I wake up and go, what am I today? And that's fun. It's a lot of fun.
It's a lot of fun.
It's a lot of fun. It's hectic, but again, it requires a lot of organizational skills, which I've had to develop since coaching that are different. But no, and again, it's I'm also on Penn State's board of trustees, and I've tried to really be a voice for kind of sanity in college athletics. And I think we'll get there. I think this, current NIL stuff's going to be crazy, but I think it'll kind of get back into a more normal realm. So I've got all kinds of stuff going on.
Well, we'll be sure to include all those links so that you guys can connect with Jay and follow along.